My parents left me hungry and alone when I was only 13. Years later, when my uncle, the only person who ever cared about me, died, they came crawling back demanding something unthinkable. Stick with me while I share my story. When I was 13, I already knew what it felt like to be invisible in my own home. My parents, Linda and Mark Carter, were never the type to care if I had food on the table or clean clothes to wear. They were busy with themselves, always out late, spending money on things that had nothing to do with me. Some days they forgot I even existed. Other days they treated me like I was nothing but a weight holding them down. There were nights when the fridge was empty, and I'd lie awake with my stomach growling, waiting for morning to come. Sometimes I tried asking them for help, but the response was always the same. My dad would snap, "You'll figure it out, Emily," while my mom would roll her eyes and say I was too dramatic. To them, I was a burden, someone they never wanted to deal with. The only light in my life back then was my uncle, David Miller. He was my mom's older brother, and unlike her, he had a heart. He noticed when I was hungry. He noticed when my clothes were too small, or when my school supplies were falling apart. Quietly, without making a scene, he'd stop by with grocery bags, slipping them into the kitchen before my parents came home. Sometimes he'd take me out for a meal and let me eat until I couldn't anymore. David never made me feel ashamed. He didn't treat me like I was asking for too much. He'd smile and tell me, "You deserve better, kiddo." Those words stuck with me because they were so different from what I heard at home. Still, it hurt. Every time David showed up with food or kindness, it only reminded me that my own parents couldn't be bothered. I'd look at them laughing with their friends, wasting money on nights out, and wonder what I had done so wrong to be born to people like them. One evening stands out in my memory. I had come home from school, tired and starving, only to find the door locked. My parents had left without telling me, and I sat on the porch steps as the sun went down. Hours passed, and I was shivering by the time Uncle David pulled up in his old truck. The second he saw me, he knew something was wrong. He wrapped his jacket around me, unlocked the door with the spare key he always carried, and took me inside. When he opened the fridge and saw it completely empty, his face hardened. He didn't yell, not at me, but I could see the anger in his eyes. That night he made me sandwiches, sat with me while I ate, and promised me that I wouldn't always have to live this way. That was the night he confronted my parents. I still remember the shouting, the way my mom's voice dripped with bitterness as she accused him of interfering, and my dad sneered that Emily wasn't his problem. But David didn't back down. His voice was firm when he said, "If you won't take care of her, I will. She deserves more than this." And from that moment on, I knew I could count on him, even when my own parents made it clear they wanted nothing to do with me. That evening I walked home from school, the air already colder than I expected. My backpack straps dug into my shoulders, and I was looking forward to the little warmth of the house. But when I reached the door and twisted the knob, it didn't budge. Locked. I knocked, then knocked harder. No answer. I circled the house, trying every door and window, but everything was shut tight. No note, no message. Just silence. The porch light didn't come on, and the house felt like it belonged to strangers. I sat down on the front steps, clutching my backpack like it could keep me warm. The sun slid behind the trees, and the chill crept deeper into my skin. My stomach ached, not just from hunger but from the heavy truth pressing in on me. No one inside cared whether I made it through that night. Cars passed on the street, their headlights sweeping over me for a moment before disappearing. I pulled my knees to my chest, wishing for the sound of a familiar voice, any sign that I wasn't completely abandoned. Hours dragged on until I heard a truck rumble to a stop. David climbed out, his expression instantly darkening when he spotted me hunched on the steps. He didn't ask questions at first. He just took off his coat and draped it over me, guiding me into the cab of his truck where the heater blasted warm air. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, voice tight. I couldn't answer. My throat burned, and my teeth wouldn't stop chattering. He didn't press me further. Instead, he drove straight to his place. His small kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and sawdust, and the light felt like safety itself. He fixed me a plate of leftovers and set it in front of me without a word. I ate slowly, every bite easing the hollow ache that had followed me for hours. When I finally looked up, David was leaning on the counter, arms crossed, eyes stormy. "This isn't right," he muttered. "Not anymore." The next day, he marched me back to the house. My parents were home this time, lounging on the couch like nothing had happened. David didn't bother with pleasantry. "You left her locked outside all night," he snapped. "She could have frozen out there." Linda scoffed, tossing her hair back. "Don't be dramatic. She can take care of herself." Mark sneered, not even looking at me. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. She's not your kid, David. She's ours. Stay out of it." I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear. But David didn't move. He planted himself between me and them like a wall. "You've had years to act like parents, and you failed every single time. If you won't take care of her, I will." Mark shot up from the couch, his face red. "She's not your responsibility." David didn't flinch. His voice was steady, sharp with conviction. "She's a child. She deserves food, a warm bed, and someone who gives a damn. If you can't provide that, don't stand in my way when I do." The room went quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall. My mother glared, my father clenched his fists, but neither of them said another word. David turned to me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "You're coming with me tonight," he said. "You won't be alone again." That was the moment everything shifted. In that instant, I knew he meant every word. He wasn't going to let me slip through the cracks. When I turned 14, David asked me to pack what little I owned. There weren't many clothes, just a few notebooks and a blanket I couldn't leave behind. He cleared out a spare bedroom in his house, making space like it had always been meant for me. The bed was simple, with clean sheets that smelled of detergent, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Life with him was steady, something I had never known before. Mornings started with breakfast waiting on the table. He'd hand me scrambled eggs and say, "Eat up, kiddo, you've got school to crush." On weekends, he pulled me into the kitchen, showing me how to measure flour, slice vegetables, and use a stove without burning the pan. At first, I was clumsy, spilling milk and dropping spoons, but he never got mad. He'd laugh and say, "That's how you learn." Beyond cooking, he showed me how to stretch a dollar. We'd sit at the table with receipts and bills spread out, and he'd explain how every choice mattered. "Money's not just numbers," he told me. "It's choices, and you deserve to have good ones." I wrote everything down in a notebook, practicing until I could do it myself. School changed too. David made sure I had supplies, even when they weren't cheap. He'd quiz me before big tests, sometimes pretending to be a goofy teacher to make me laugh. For the first time, I actually cared about grades, because someone else cared whether I succeeded. Slowly, the bond between us grew deeper. He wasn't just an uncle anymore. The way he reminded me to eat, the way he listened when I talked about friends or classes, it was the kind of attention I had always longed for. When I slipped and called him Dad one night by accident, I froze in embarrassment, but he only smiled softly and said, "That's fine by me." Meanwhile, Linda and Mark faded out of my world completely. They didn't call, didn't write, didn't even ask where I was. It was as if they had erased me from their lives. At first, the silence stung, but soon it became clear that their absence was a gift. I no longer had to wonder if they would come home angry, or if I'd have to go to bed hungry. They were gone, and that emptiness left room for something better. The distance gave me strength. Every time I mastered a recipe or solved a math problem on my own, I felt a little taller. Every evening we sat together at the dinner table, I felt a little less like the forgotten child I once was. Gratitude ran through everything. Grateful for the roof over my head, the steady meals, the gentle jokes, and most of all, the unconditional care I had finally found. I grew into myself under David's watch. Where there had once been doubt, there was now confidence. Where there had been fear, there was security. He never tried to replace what was missing. He simply showed me how to build something new. By the time I was settled fully in his home, I knew I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was finally living. By the time I turned 19, I was enrolled in college. Balancing classes, part-time work, and long study nights wasn't easy, but I always had someone in my corner. David checked in often, making sure I ate properly, and reminding me not to push myself too hard. He never once let me forget that my education mattered, even more than the sacrifices he made to help me through it. But then his health began to falter. At first it seemed like small things, a cough that lingered, a tiredness that never quite lifted. Soon it grew harder for him to keep up with the small business he ran. Doctor visits became regular, and I sat beside him during long waits in sterile rooms, pretending not to be scared while my hands shook in my lap. The decline was steady, and no matter how much I wanted to fight it, there was nothing I could do to stop what was happening. Watching him weaken was unbearable. This was the man who had given me stability, who had believed in me when no one else did. Now I was the one reminding him to eat, bringing him water, and keeping track of his medication. The day he passed left a hole so wide it felt impossible to breathe. I walked through his house in silence, every corner carrying memories of his laugh, his lessons, his presence. It wasn't just a loss. It was the loss of the only person who had ever chosen me without hesitation. The grief sat heavy, and I didn't know how to move forward without him. Not long after, I was called to sit in a quiet office lined with bookshelves and heavy chairs. The lawyer unfolded papers with a calm voice, reading words that seemed unreal. David had named me as the sole heir. The house I had lived in, the savings he had built, and even the small business he had run, all of it was left in my name. For a moment I couldn't process what I was hearing. It felt too big, too final. My hands trembled as I realized the weight of his trust. He had planned for me, thought about my future long after he knew he wouldn't be there to guide me. Shock gave way to a flood of gratitude. I hadn't expected anything. Having his love and support had already been more than I ever thought I deserved. But to know he had arranged for me to be secure, even after he was gone, made my chest ache with both sorrow and appreciation. Sitting there, I understood that this wasn't just about property or money. It was his way of giving me a foundation I could build on, a chance to stand strong in a world that had once tried to break me down. He was still protecting me, even in absence. I left the office clutching the papers, tears sliding down my face. The grief didn't lessen, but it mixed with something powerful, an overwhelming sense of being seen, chosen, and cared for until the very end. The funeral had barely ended when two faces I hadn't seen in years appeared at the edge of the crowd. Linda and Mark stood side by side, dressed in dark clothes that looked borrowed, expressions carefully arranged to appear sorrowful. For a moment I thought I was imagining them, ghosts from a past I had long left behind. But they were real, and they were watching me. They kept their distance that day, offering no words, no embraces. It wasn't until weeks later that they showed up unannounced at the house, walking through the front gate as if they had every right to be there. I froze at the sight of them, my chest tightening. They greeted me with polite smiles, speaking in soft tones that didn't match the sharp memories I carried. "We're so sorry about David," Linda said, resting a hand against her chest. "He was family after all." Mark nodded along, adding, "We should all be coming together right now. That's what families do." At first, I bit my tongue. I wanted to believe maybe they had come out of genuine regret. But it didn't take long for the truth to slip through. Their questions circled closer and closer to one subject: what David had left behind. "So," Mark began casually, his eyes scanning the living room as if already taking inventory, "what's going to happen with the house?" Linda chimed in quickly. "And the business, the savings. He wouldn't want any of that wasted. It's meant to stay in the family." Their words cut through me. I stared at them, stunned by the audacity. For years they had acted like I didn't exist, and now they wanted to stand in this house and claim rights to the very things left in my care. My pulse hammered in my ears, anger boiling under my skin. "This is my home," I said, my voice sharper than I expected. "He left everything to me. You know that." Linda's expression hardened. "You don't understand, Emily. You were just a child he took in. That doesn't erase the fact that we are his real family. Blood comes first." The words were bitter, twisting the knife deeper. They wanted to rewrite history, to erase the years of abandonment, to pretend they had any claim to what David had worked for. Mark leaned forward, his tone turning cold. "You have no right to keep all of this. It belongs to us as much as it does to you." I met their eyes one by one, fury steadying my voice. "You didn't care when I was starving. You didn't care when I was alone. You don't get to show up now and take what he gave me. Not a cent. Not a brick. Nothing." The silence that followed was heavy, the tension sharp enough to slice the air. Linda's face twisted with frustration, while Mark's jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. They had expected me to fold, to hand everything over. Instead, I stood my ground, every ounce of strength fueled by the man who had believed in me when they never did. That night they left empty-handed, but the look in their eyes told me it wouldn't be the last time I'd see them. They didn't stop after that first visit. Within days, Linda and Mark were back, knocking at the door so loudly the neighbors peeked through their curtain. At first, I ignored them, but when their voices carried down the street, I had no choice but to open the door just to quiet the spectacle. Linda stepped forward, clutching her purse against her chest like she was heartbroken. "Emily, how can you treat us this way?" she asked loud enough for the couple across the street to hear. "We're your parents. We deserve at least a little respect." Mark joined in, his tone sharper. "You've gotten arrogant, acting like everything here belongs to you alone. People are starting to talk." Their accusations spilled into the air, crafted to make me look like the ungrateful daughter who had turned her back on her family. Neighbors whispered, their eyes flicking from me to the people who had once abandoned me without hesitation. Shame burned in my cheeks, but beneath it was rage. I tried closing the door, but Linda wedged her hand against it. "Don't forget who gave you life," she said, her face twisting with indignation. "Without us, you wouldn't even be standing here." Her words hit a deep scar, one I thought had healed. For a split second, that old doubt resurfaced. Maybe I did owe them something. Maybe keeping everything David entrusted to me made me selfish. But the thought dissolved as quickly as it came. I remembered the years of silence, the empty nights, the way they had vanished as if I were nothing to them. "You don't get to claim credit for me," I said, my voice shaking but strong. "You walked away. That was your choice." Mark scoffed. "We gave you life, Emily. That alone means you should give back. Stop acting like you're better than the people who raised you." Raised me. The phrase tasted bitter. They had left me to fend for myself, and now they dared to rewrite the past, as if providing nothing counted as parenting. My nails dug into my palms as I forced myself not to scream. Instead, I stepped onto the porch, meeting their eyes directly. You want me to feel guilty, but it won't work. You don't get to abandon me and then show up years later demanding payment. Linda's voice cracked as she reached for me. We're not asking for much. Just a fair share. We're family. I pulled back, the anger burning hotter. Family doesn't vanish when things get hard. Family doesn't show up only when there's money involved. Stop pretending you care about me. You care about what you think you can take. The neighbors were still watching, some with pity, some with curiosity. My parents must have realized the performance wasn't going as planned, because they retreated down the walkway with promises to return. And they did. Again and again, they came without warning, each time louder, each time more desperate. They tried every tactic, accusations, guilt, pity, even anger. But no matter how heavy their words landed, I refused to bend. Every time they left, the resolve inside me grew stronger. I would not let them erase the truth. I would not hand over what was never there. The unannounced visits eventually shifted into something worse. One morning, a thick envelope arrived with my name typed neatly across the front. Inside were official papers stamped with court marking. Linda and Mark had decided to challenge everything left to me, demanding the estate be handed over to them. Reading through the claims, I felt sick. They painted themselves as loving parents who had only ever wanted the best for me. They accused David of taking advantage of my youth and confusion, insisting he manipulated me into turning against them. Every page dripped with lies, reshaping history into something unrecognizable. When the first hearing began, I sat stiffly at the long wooden table while they paraded themselves as victim. Linda dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, telling the judge how heartbroken she had been to be pushed aside by her own daughter. Mark leaned into the performance, shaking his head as he described how unfair it was that David had excluded them from his estate. But they hadn't counted on the evidence I carried. I had spent days gathering every shred of proof, determined not to let their false story stand. I presented letters David had written over the years, short notes he had left for me, reminding me to eat breakfast or encouraging me before exam. In them, he referred to me as his responsibility, his pride, his kid. Each word was a testament to the role he had played in my life. I also brought forward school records showing years of absences and late assignments before I moved in with David, followed by a clear rise in grades once he took me under his wing. The contrast spoke volumes. Teachers confirmed his involvement at parent meetings, while none could recall Linda or Mark ever showing up. The strongest blow came from the neighbors. Several took the stand to explain how they had watched me grow up in David's home. They spoke of seeing him drive me to school, cheer for me at events, and keep the house filled with stability. Some admitted they had even noticed my parents' absence, pointing out how they rarely visited or acknowledged me. As their version unraveled, Linda's tears dried, replaced by anger flashing in her eyes. Mark tried to push back, accusing me of turning people against them, but the weight of their deception had already collapsed under the truth. The judge listened carefully, reviewing each piece of testimony. When the ruling was finally delivered, my chest tightened, every muscle tense. The words were clear. David's will stood exactly as written. The estate belonged to me. Their attempt to seize it had failed. Linda gasped, clutching the table as though the ground beneath her had given way. Mark muttered something under his breath, his jaw clenched tight. I sat still, trying to keep my composure, but inside relief surged like a tide breaking free. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt the victory wasn't just about property or money. It was about truth. Their lies hadn't erased the life David built for me, and the law had recognized. They had lost, and for the first time, I realized they had no real power over me anymore. I didn't celebrate when the case ended. There was no shouting, no grand declaration. I simply walked away from the courthouse and decided the best response would be to build the life David always wanted me to have. Noise and drama wouldn't change anything, but progress would. The small business he left behind was modest but steady. Most people might have sold it off, but I couldn't bring myself to let it slip away. It was his creation, something he had poured effort and pride into, and I felt a responsibility to keep it alive. I spent long nights studying financial guides, meeting with advisors, and learning every detail of how the operation worked. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I began shaping it into something more stable. I reinvested profits carefully, improving equipment, expanding services, and treating employees the way I had seen David treat me, with respect and patience. Word spread and customers responded. The business that once struggled began to grow. Each step forward filled me with quiet satisfaction, not only because of the success itself, but because I knew it honored the man who had trusted me. While my days filled with work and plans, Linda and Mark kept reaching out. Letters arrived, followed by phone calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Sometimes they left messages, voices dripping with false sweetness, begging for a conversation. Other times they tried anger, accusing me of being cold, insisting I was still their daughter, whether I liked it or not. I didn't answer. Not once. Every attempt went unanswered, every plea met with silence. For years, I had longed for their attention, but now I saw it clearly for what it was: desperation born from their own failures, not love. Neighbors mentioned seeing them around town, their finances clearly crumbling. The same people who had once boasted about nights out and flashy purchases now struggled to keep afloat. Meanwhile, I was thriving quietly, growing stronger, more independent, and more certain of who I was. Revenge didn't come through confrontation. It came through living well, through turning pain into progress. Each success was a reminder that I no longer needed them, that their neglect no longer defined me. They had tried to take what wasn't theirs, and when they couldn't, they were left with nothing but bitterness. I never shouted, never gloated. I simply kept moving, one step at a time, building a future they had no place in. And as they slipped further into the shadows, I stood firmly in the light of everything David had given me. It was late afternoon when the knock came, sharp and uneven, as though the person on the other side had been pounding for a while. I opened the door to find Linda standing there alone. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes swollen from crying, and she clutched her handbag like it was the last thing she owned. "Emily," she said, her voice cracking, "please, I need help." She stepped closer, desperation etched into every line of her face. "We're out of options. Your father can't find steady work, and the bills keep piling up. You have more than enough now. Can't you spare something for your own mother?" I froze in the doorway, every muscle stiff. For years, she hadn't looked at me with anything resembling concern. Now her eyes searched mine like I was her savior. Anger rose in my throat, but I kept my voice even. "Why are you here now, after everything?" Her lips trembled. "Because you're the only one who can help us." The words broke something inside me. All the memories I had pushed down surged back. Nights of hunger, days of waiting on cold steps, the emptiness of being treated like I didn't matter. My chest tightened as the silence stretched between us. "You think I forgot?" I asked quietly, my voice shaking with fury I had carried for years. "You think I don't remember being 13 years old and sitting in the dark with nothing to eat? You locked me out of my own home. You didn't care if I froze, if I starved, if I disappeared. You made me believe I was nothing." Linda's face crumpled, tears spilling faster. "I didn't know how bad it was," she whispered. "Don't lie to me." I snapped, the words spilling before I could stop them. "You knew. You just didn't care. You left me behind, and David was the one who picked me up. He gave me food, a bed, a life. He believed in me when you couldn't even look at me." She shook her head, reaching out, but I stepped back. My voice rose, sharp and unrelenting. "And now, after years of silence, you come here begging for what he left me? You don't deserve a single piece of it. Not the house, not the business, not 1 cent. It was his choice, and he chose me because I was the one who stood by him. You abandoned me. You abandoned your own child." The words filled the air, heavy and final. Linda sobbed openly, her knees buckling as if the weight of the truth had struck her down. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. For a brief moment, I almost felt pity, but the years of pain hardened my resolve. "You can cry all you want," I said, my tone steady now, almost calm. "But I won't give you anything. This is not yours. It never was, and it never will be." She lifted her tear-streaked face, searching for some sign of softness in me. There was none. I had given enough, more than enough, to people who had given me nothing. Linda stumbled back toward the gate, her sobs echoing down the street. I stood in the doorway until she was gone, the air thick with everything that had finally been said. For the first time, I felt the full weight of my voice, unbroken and unshaken. The garden behind the house had always been David's favorite place. Rows of flowers and vegetables grew in neat patterns, bordered by stones he had collected over the years. After everything that had happened, I found myself standing there one quiet morning, breathing in the scent of earth and leaves still damp with dew. I traced the edges of the paths he had laid, remembering the afternoons when he had knelt here with gloves on, teaching me how to press seeds into the soil. He used to say that tending a garden was like tending yourself, both needed patience, care, and time to grow strong. Back then, I didn't fully understand, but now the lesson carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The sunlight broke through the branches above, warming my face, and I let myself think of his voice. He had always told me that strength didn't mean shutting out the world. It meant knowing your worth and never letting anyone convince you otherwise. Those words had carried me through hunger, neglect, and battles I never should have had to fight. Now, standing here, I realized I had finally stepped into the person he believed I could be. There was no shadow of Linda or Mark in this space. They no longer had the power to control me or rewrite the truth. Their absence no longer hurt. It was simply silence, and in that silence I felt peace. The anger that had burned in me for so long eased, replaced by something steadier, something like freedom. I crouched to touch one of the sprouting plants, its green leaves stretching toward the sky. It reminded me of myself, once small, overlooked, but given the right care, able to grow in ways no one expected. I smiled softly, thinking of how David would have teased me for getting sentimental, though I knew he would have been proud. For years, I had been defined by what I lacked: food, love, stability. Now, I was defined by what I had built. The house was no longer just a shelter, it was a home. The business was no longer just survival, it was a future. And I was no longer just the girl left behind. I was someone who had chosen her own path. I stood tall in the middle of that garden, the quiet around me settling like a promise. I wasn't alone anymore, even if the man who raised me was gone. His presence lingered in every brick, every blossom, every memory he had left behind. He had chosen me when no one else would, and now I was choosing myself with the same certainty. As the breeze rustled through the leaves, I whispered a thank you, not just to him, but to the part of myself that had survived long enough to find this peace. The chapter of fear and abandonment had closed. What remained was strength, self-worth, and the life I had fought to claim. And with that, I walked back toward the house, my house, ready to continue forward, carrying his lessons not as burdens, but as the roots of everything I had become. Do you think I made the right choice walking away from my parents, or should I have given them one more chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories.